kiss for you.
All right, let's try and answer the question in the title first. What happened to the finals? I want to be very clear that I don't think the finals failed or it flopped or it didn't do as well as it should have or anything like that. It's still going strong. As you can see, it still has a season 3. It's still pumping out content and people are still playing it. What I think a lot of people mean when they say what happened to the finals is they really see that hype that it had, that, anticipation, the hundreds of thousands of people, and then they see the player numbers now at like 10,000 or so, and that's a little concerning, right? A lot of people bounce off of this kind of thing. It had the potential to be something like a CSGO, and it ends up just kind of being a more niche experience. I really want to answer that question first and foremost by what I kind of experienced, and that was 2 things: a balance issue and an objective issue. And I think a lot of people had similar things. A lot of people also wanted like more game modes, and we're going to talk about that. But the 2 issues, at least for me, were balance and objective play. So very basically how the finals works is if I go to contestants, right, you have basically 3 different classes: light, medium, heavy. And you're on a team of 3. It's a 3v3 thing, objective based. There's a couple game modes, 2 to start. One is basically dog tags, right? You're going to kill people, you're going to destroy them, they turn to gold. You get that gold, you bring it into like a mailbox or something, you're able to get points, enough points wins you the game. The primary game mode is a 3-on-3, the one where you're trying to go and get the box from a place and bring it over to a different place, defend that as it's being, attacked by a bunch of people, and then it'll cha-ching and it'll take it over to an extraction point. You do that and you get a bunch of points and you potentially win the game from that, right? The things that made this unique, on top of the just like the whole hold the point system, were a bunch of different destructibility, right? It was all server-side destructibility, so you could do some crazy things with bombs and destruction and pew-pew everywhere, right? It was that team-based option, and there was a bunch of variants, right? Similar to something like what Hyperscape had, you had different events that could occur. Low gravity, for example, mega damage, meteor showers, orbital lasers coming in, that kind of thing. And you would also, a lot of the time, have different map modifiers. So you'd have a general map, but, sometimes it's saying here, a sandstorm could affect the map occasionally, right? That's similar to game show events, but it was more like on the basis. So like a sandstorm or like fog or something would kind of happen for the entire map, versus these were kind of like intermittent game mode events. But that's kind of how it worked. And the biggest problem that the game ended up having with balance is the heavies, right? Light, medium, heavy. The heavies were very good. And they were actually destructively good. They had all the ability to destroy all the things. So if I go back here to contestants, right? Heavies. Heavies had access to a lot, right? They had access to a lot of the like sledgehammer that could destroy stuff. They have like the grenades, the explosive mines, right? They even have some stuff here like the pyro mines and everything else, the dome shields. They had a lot more ability to kind of destroy things that other classes didn't get, right? Because as you can see, if I can switch between them, you have different options. And the heavies had a lot of different options, right? They had the flamethrower, they had the explosive mines, they had the C4 that could destroy, they had a sledgehammer, they had like a rush move that could burst through buildings, as you can see here in the demo. The other ones didn't have any of that. The other ones just had the basic kind of frag grenades and stuff that could kind of do a little bit, but it was really showing that, like, okay, the heavy is just destroying things. And because you have a character that has a ton of health and can just smash through walls and stuff, and is basically the Hulk, you get pretty unbalanced. The light, no one really uses it because it dies too quickly and doesn't have enough offensive capabilities. The medium is the basic, and then the heavy does all the damage. And so you get a very unbalanced game, and so you just end up having like a medium and 2 heavies on basically every team go through with that team, or like all heavies or something. There's not really a disadvantage to playing a heavy other than speed, which you can obviously make up for in destruction. The second thing is objective play. Now, what I really mean by this is the base mode here. The way that the objective play works, a lot of teams don't try and defend when they get it to that second spot, right? You're going to take it and put it somewhere else. They don't defend because there's no incentive to defend. There's no reason to defend. So what you end up getting is a game where people all rush to be the first one to take the cube. They take the cube, and then everyone kind of just sits out and waits until that team puts the cube in the thing and defends it, doing nothing for a majority of the time, and then everyone kind of rushes in at that last second, get it off before it cha-ching. And that kind of not rewarding defense is where I think the objective play gets annoying, right? As many map varieties as you can do, this is a very systemic game. It's one based on systems and based on the mechanics and the flow of the game, similar to something like CSGO, where once you have a strategy, that strategy is pretty pervasive and it doesn't exactly change that frequently. There's not a lot of variety in what you can do if everyone just kind of waits around for one thing to happen and then everyone kind of rushes it, right? So those are the two things that kind of hit me. A lot of people were a little bit annoyed about the game for doing things like not having a bunch of game modes, right? Those were basically the only 2 game modes that you had in this game, were a pretty competitive and sweaty mode for the 3v3 one, and then a dog tags mode, which was pretty similar, but it was just generally speaking on a different map. And people wanted like a death match or more objective play or more casual modes, and so people were kind of a little bit annoyed that there wasn't any of that. A lot of the time, the kits that you can get, like the kind of like character kits, were pretty similar. It was like, oh, everyone's going to use a jump pad. If you're heavy, you're going to use the sledgehammer, and you're going to use the riot shield to bust through things. Like, there wasn't a ton of variety in the kits, and so even with the other options, not having a ton of variety in the kits and the imbalance really just doesn't lead to a whole lot of interesting game mechanics. You see, the unique mechanics don't really do a ton when you end up being basically just restricted to only playing heavies and only using what's basically optimal or the meta. And so I think one thing that the developers tried to do in removing that meta experience was add a new game mode. Trying to appease people, they decided, hey, let's do a new game mode, right? People are looking at a new game mode. Maybe it's a little bit more casual. Maybe it's a little more less intensive. Maybe it shakes things up a bit. And so they decided, okay, a payload. The issue with the payload mode, which you'll see is the power shift mode here. Because they're trying to be unique, the payload mode is basically everyone fish in a barrel into this thing that you kind of have to defend as you're in it, and it's going to go through and destroy a bunch of stuff, right? It's this little like boat thing here. Well, if you couldn't tell, the maps are kind of designed with a bunch of high elements, and if you're all in a little fishbowl right here trying to defend as destruction's going around you, you are inherently at a disadvantage. Now, compared to other payload modes you might see in other games, you don't have a lot of opportunity for cover. And you can't make cover that easily in this game because the only real option for cover above you is like the foam stuff. And so what you end up having to do is what you see here is a bunch of people are shooting at you from above. You have to kind of plant mines and kind of defend yourself. But ultimately, especially in the newer maps, you just get hit with grenades because that's a very common thing. That's a thing people kind of load out, right? You're just ultimately going to get hit by a bunch of grenades, a frag grenade, an explosive mine, a flashbang, a goo grenade, a pyro grenade, C4, gas grenade. There's a ton of throwables in this game. And when you have everyone in a barrel and everyone throwing stuff at you, it gets a problem. Similar with the objective play issue. Not only do you have everyone throwing stuff at you, chucking things at you, destroying stuff, you don't get to maintain progress. If everyone dies on the thing, the boat starts going back. And because of the destruction, the way the destruction works, you no longer have, like, the destruction's kind of a barricade. It basically shows like, hey, you can't necessarily protect the payload because as the payload's moving, it's destroying the land that's kind of around it. The land around it obviously is be used for cover. It can be used for shooting people and that stuff. But as it gets destroyed by the thing, all of a sudden you don't have that. And so theoretically that allows the other team to kind of like that back and forth, right? You're not going to be able to hog the objective and just prevent people from getting it. You have everyone going here, it's going great. They're plowing through some stuff, they're killing enemies the best they can. And then everyone decides, hey, let's wait off, let's perch up on this hill or whatever, and then let's all go attack at once, and then you lose. And then because you're so far back as the spawn points are, and you try to get to it, now you're at the disadvantage, right? Because basically what happens is your payload, it's going forward, destroying stuff. All of a sudden you die, your entire team dies, you go back to the start. Well, now all that cover that you had that was, supposed to be yours and helping you is no longer there because it's destroyed, right? Because of how the payload's working. And so now you're even more fish in a barrel because they just start attacking you once they have control. And so it's a very one-sided thing where instead of it being equal opportunity for both sides to play the objective, what ends up being is one side does all the work, right? And destroys all the buildings and things that I use for protection, and then the team comes in, kills them, they have to not restart, but they have to go back to the start, and so then the other team comes in, now with no cover to protect the first team from coming back in, and then they just start to win, right? So basically, it's to an advantage for you to be the losing team so that when you win, you have a higher advantage to winning. As the destruction goes, it's only really useful once, and it's only really useful for the party that destroys it beforehand rather than after the fact. Hopefully that made sense. Basically, the way the destruction works, it disincentivizes that second party from really giving it back and forth and kind of incentivizes them to just wait out until all the clutter is cleared and then they go back in. And obviously they're trying to use the destruction capabilities they have, and that's great, but I don't think the payload and the way the payload's set up right now is necessarily kind of for it. And so I still think they're dealing with this fact that we have a unique mechanic and this destruction, but they don't know really what to do with it. They tried new game modes, people liked it, but a lot of the time it gets really competitive and there's some balance issues. Well, when we try a game mode that's been proven, we try and change it a little bit, right? To add our destruction. Well, now we have a flaw. It's no longer the payload that works, it's an unbalanced game where the payload isn't super in the favor of the attacking team. The game needs to kind of focus on traditional stuff. You can use your destruction in a team deathmatch mode or capture the flag if that's where you're going. You don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel just to put destruction. Destruction's a cool mechanic. You can use it in basically anything. You could have a Splatoon mode or whatever where the guns are replaced with paintballs, right? And the destruction mode would still be cool. It doesn't have to be, if you're trying to add modes, it doesn't have to be this reinvention of the wheel. You can just kind of you can make a rhythm game with the destruction, it would still be cool because you like hit different notes and it destroys something, right? There's a bunch of different options. Them trying to not only incorporate destruction, but also into these modes that try and change. It's basically like trying to have a very high-tech horse and buggy, but also we decide, hey, let's change the wheels out for like ones that also work on water. It's like, you don't need to do that. You can just make a high-tech buggy. Everyone's going to be pretty cool with that anyway. You don't need to also change the wheels. So that's kind of where I just feel that the finals is, and that's why a lot of people don't play it, is because of those issues when it comes to balance and it comes to objective play. It just really isn't as thought out as I think the developers intend it to be.